There is a secret that very few people say out loud, not because it is complicated, but because it collapses the way people have been searching for discipline for a very long time. Discipline is not created in moments of excitement. It is formed in the sentences you allow to echo inside your head every single day. You listen to many things, videos, podcasts, advice, yet you still do not change. Not because you do not understand, but because the thing you listen to the most every day is still the voice inside your own head. And that voice is not neutral. It reminds you that you are tired today. It tells you that doing it tomorrow is fine. It asks what the point is of trying so hard. Not once, but repeatedly, consistently, every day. You do not realize that you are being trained, not by the videos you play, but by the quiet sentences you allow to exist without resistance. There is a sentence I once found very uncomfortable to hear, but over time I realized how true it is. You become what you listen to the most when no one is watching. When you are tired, that voice appears. When you are bored, it appears again. When you start doing something seriously, it shows up even earlier. And what makes it dangerous is that it sounds reasonable. No one needs discipline for an entire lifetime. Resting today is not a big deal. Doing less is still doing something. But discipline does not collapse in a single day. It is worn down by every time you listen to it. Every time you silently agree. Every time you allow yourself to slide without calling the situation by its real name. You think that to be disciplined, you need more motivation. But the truth is the opposite. You need a different voice. A voice that does not indulge you, but also does not insult you. A voice clear enough to remind you of what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. There is a man named Ryan. Every morning he listens to the same thing, not to feel excited, not to feel powerful, but to remind himself of one very simple truth. Today, I do not need to feel good to do the right thing. He does not change in a week. There is no breakthrough. But after a few months, one thing becomes very clear. He no longer argues with himself as much. That is the first real sign of discipline. When you no longer have to convince yourself every day. When what needs to be done is no longer a question, but a default. Listening every day is not to create discipline. Listening every day is to protect it. Just like you do not brush your teeth because you fear they will fall out today. You do it because you understand what will happen if you do not do it long enough. Discipline works the same way. It needs to be reminded. Not because you forget the knowledge, but because you easily forget your commitment to yourself when you are tired. In the next part, we will confront an uncomfortable truth directly. Why so many people listen to motivational content every day and still do not become more disciplined, and what truly needs to be repeated for discipline to become a reflex rather than an effort. There is a very common paradox. The people who listen to motivation the most are often the least disciplined, not because they are lazy, but because they are listening to the wrong thing. Most motivational content is designed to create feeling. The feeling of power, the feeling of being energized, the feeling that today you are a better version of yourself. But that feeling does not last. It fades very quickly. And when it fades, what remains is the familiar exhaustion. The problem is not listening. The problem is what you repeat. Discipline is not built from emotional peaks. It is built from repetition of very ordinary things. You listen to motivation every day, but still procrastinate because inside your head there is still a negotiation happening. One voice asks whether today is really necessary. Another voice answers that tomorrow is also fine. And you stand in the middle, trying to choose. That is the most exhausting mental state. There is something very few people realize. Every time you have to argue with yourself in order to do something, you are paying a very high price. Not in time, but in mental energy. And that energy is what decides whether you are disciplined or not. Discipline is not doing things when you feel motivated. Discipline is not needing to argue. There is a woman named Eleanor who once said that her biggest problem was not a lack of goals, it was that every morning she had to convince herself to start. And that persuasion was always long, tiring, and often ended in procrastination. She listened to many things. She understood many reasons. But inside her mind, there was still a hidden belief that if the feeling was not right, then she should not begin. That belief destroys discipline more than anything else. You do not need the right feeling to act. You only need a decision that has already been made. Discipline does not live in the present moment. It is prepared the day before. What you listen to every day, if it is right, will not make you excited. It will make you clear. It reminds you that this is no longer a choice. It is part of the person you are building. When something becomes identity, you do not need motivation to do it. You do not wait for emotion. You simply do it, just like many other things you already do in life without thinking. Listening every day is not to create pressure. Listening every day is to remove negotiation. In the next part, we will go deeper into how the right voice can restructure your identity. Not through slogans, but through very short, very direct sentences, strong enough to cut hesitation the moment it appears. There comes a point when discipline is no longer about whether you will do something or not. It becomes about who you are. Before that point, you are always trying. After that point, you are simply living according to the person you have chosen to be. The difference lies in identity, not behavior. Many people try to force discipline by adding more rules, more plans, more pressure, but they miss one fundamental thing. If the voice in your head still says that you are someone who often gives up, then every system will collapse the moment you feel tired. The voice you listen to every day does not only affect your emotions, it is teaching you who you are. If every day you hear sentences like, "Keep going, you can do it," then you are still standing in the position of someone who needs to be pushed. But if every day you hear sentences like, "This is what I do, whether I like it or not," then you are moving from motivation to identity. There is a sentence I once heard and remembered for a very long time. A disciplined person does not ask whether they should do it today. They only ask when they will do it. That sentence does not excite you, but it cuts through a lot of hesitation. There is a man named Michael who struggled with training. He understood the benefits. He had periods when he did very well, but every few weeks, everything collapsed again. Not because he was lazy, but because in his mind, training was still something extra, not something that belonged to him. When he began listening every day to one very short, very firm message, "I am someone who does not skip workouts, even when I do not feel like it," something changed. Not his body, but the way he spoke to himself. Whenever the delaying voice appeared, it had no ground to stand on, because the decision had already been made. This is the key point. The right voice does not persuade you. It reminds you of a past decision. Discipline is not created in moments of weakness. It is anchored when you are still clear-minded. And listening every day is how you reinforce that anchor. Not to make yourself believe, but to make yourself remember. Remember the kind of person you chose to become. Remember that some things do not need emotions attached. Remember that being tired is not a reason to break promises to yourself. When identity begins to change, behavior follows naturally. You no longer have to fight thoughts as much, because most delaying thoughts no longer fit the person you are building. In the next part, we will go into the deepest layer. How discipline stops being something you have to maintain and becomes a natural reflex, even on the worst days. There is a moment when discipline is no longer driven by willpower. It is driven by reflex. This is the deepest layer. When everything is going well, anyone can do the right thing. But when you are sleep-deprived, low on energy, uninspired, and emotionally flat, that is where real discipline reveals itself. And at that level, discipline is no longer controlled by effort. It is controlled by habit. A reflex does not need motivation. A reflex does not need debate. A reflex simply happens. You brush your teeth every morning, not because you ask yourself whether you should. You do it because your body is used to it. That habit did not come from a lifelong decision. It came from repetition long enough that the brain stopped asking questions. Discipline works the same way. The problem is that many people are trying to use willpower to do the job of reflex. And willpower is thin. It drains quickly, especially on bad days. There is one truth that is difficult to accept. You cannot rely on the best version of yourself to live your entire life. You must build systems for the worst version of yourself. The version that wakes up exhausted. The version that doubts everything. The version that wants to skip everything today. If your discipline only exists when you feel okay, then it is not discipline. It is favorable conditions. Listening every day, when done correctly, is not meant to activate emotion. It is meant to program reflex. The sentences you repeat become the first sentences that appear when you are tired, and the first sentence decides whether you move forward or turn away. There is a man named Daniel who realized that he did not fail because he lacked ability, but because every time he was tired, he let the old voice decide for him. That voice always had very reasonable reasons to stop. When he replaced it with one short, firm sentence, "I do not need enthusiasm to do this," things began to change. Not fast, but solid. The new voice does not argue. It ends the conversation. That is the sign that reflex is forming. When delaying thoughts appear but are no longer continued, they are cut off, not by force, but by familiarity of a decision repeated too many times. Sustainable discipline does not create a feeling of victory. It creates silence. Silence in the head. Silence because there is no more convincing, no more justifying, no more fighting. You simply do. In the final part, we will close with a very real shift. What actually happens when you listen to the right thing every day long enough, and why it does not just create discipline, but creates an entirely different person. When you have listened long enough, one thing becomes very clear. You are no longer searching for discipline. You are living inside it. Not because you are always strong, but because you no longer return to the old path every time you are weak. The biggest change is not your schedule. It is the silence inside. Before, every small task required a negotiation. Do it or not, now or later. Is it worth it? Am I good enough? Those questions used to drain enormous amounts of energy. Now, most of them are gone. Not because you found better answers, but because you stopped asking. When the right voice has been repeated long enough, it is no longer a reminder. It becomes the background, like a familiar sound in a room that you no longer notice, but that keeps everything stable. At this point, discipline is no longer force. It is consistency. You no longer act because you hope life will change one day. You act because this is how you live. There is a very subtle shift. You no longer need anyone to see you. No praise, no validation, no recognition. Discipline has become a relationship between you and yourself. You keep your word, not to prove anything, but because you respect yourself enough not to break it. Listening every day, when done correctly, does not make you rigid. It makes you reliable, reliable to yourself. And when you become reliable to yourself, you stop doubting yourself in the big decisions of life. You know that if you say you will do something, you will do it. No drama, no build-up. And from there, many doors open in very ordinary ways. Opportunities come, you do not panic. Challenges come, you do not run. Bad days come, you still stand. Not because you are special, but because you trained long enough to stop reacting in the old way. If there is one final thing that needs to be repeated, it is this. You do not need more motivation. You need a voice that is right enough to be repeated every day until it becomes the way you exist. And when that happens, discipline is no longer the goal. It is the foundation.